Welcome back to the Gnostic Warrior. How are you doing today, David?
I'm good. Thanks, Ron.
You're welcome. And this is a continuation of discussions for the audience out there. This, I believe, is the fourth time David has been on the Gnostic Warrior. We've talked about many different subjects. And today we have a special presentation where we're going to talk about a few chapters in his book, upcoming book, Ordo Ab Chao. And we wanted to start out, a good place is chaos magic, right, David?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So why don't you go ahead and take the lead?
Sure. So if you can all see my screen, this is the homepage of my latest website. So I've had a few in the past. I finally managed to consolidate it. So this features all the content of my book, which is 6 volumes. So, I've been at this research for 30 years. I've written 4 or 5 previous books. And this latest book basically dwarfs everything that I've had up until this point. I'm surprised that after all this time, I'm still able to find, significant events and themes. And it's been substantial this time around. So there's a lot here. Again, it covers, basically, I consider that all my other books combined probably feature about 15% of what's in this book. And so there's a couple of underlying themes. And the reason why it's called Ordo Ab Chao is because fundamentally what seems to be happening is that, I suspected this for a while, and I finally clued in when I took another look at Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma. And it's funny that this suspicion that I had for so long was there right in the first few pages, and it's confirmed that basically the reason why St. John is the patron saint of Freemasonry is because he's considered the author of the Book of Revelation. And the Book of Revelation is essentially the blueprint. So if we understand that, occultism is founded on communication with discarnate entities or spirits, but organized occultism is receiving information from these entities and then using it to guide their ultimately political actions. So that's why, for many times, this is basically their counterfeits to the original revelations from God. These are revelations from the what they call the spirit world. And so when the Book of Revelation came about, it was basically just an example of many types of revelations that emerged at the time. And it's considered basically, advice and information and information from beyond. And it's understood to outline what's going to happen. But, from most religious people, when they look at prophecies, they kind of wait for them to happen. Whereas for occultists, they see it as signposts, and effectively it's confirmation of the events that they are expected to bring about. And that kind of outlook was really formulated by Isaac Luria, who's considered the father of Lurianic Kabbalah, who basically explain that the end times is not something we wait to happen; it's something that we have to bring about. So the notion of chaos is that chaos is what precedes the return of the Messiah. This is a Gnostic version, the Gnostic version of interpretation of the Bible. So it's in reverse. So their Messiah is actually the Antichrist, and the Antichrist is, the Messiah. Their Messiah is the Antichrist of those who have the opposite interpretation. So what it means is that if the Book of Revelation describes chaos preceding the arrival of the Messiah, that means that those conditions have to be created in order to accelerate or bring about his return. So if it describes, wars and pestilence and disease and corruption, then of course it means that those conditions have to be brought about. So the whole idea of Freemasonry, according to Albert Pike, is that it's what's called the Great Work, and the Great Work is a term borrowed from alchemy, and effectively means that the plan of the Freemasons is to fulfill the Book of Revelation. The ultimate goal is to rebuild the Third Temple, because that's where the Messiah Antichrist is going to rule from. And that's why they consider themselves Masons, because they are actively building allegorically the Third Temple of Solomon. So Albert Pike, it turns out, was aligned with a Rothschild agent. His name was Judah P. Benjamin. So I go at length on that subject in a chapter on the Civil War. We won't be able to cover the details here, but I mention that because both of them belong to an order called the Mystic Crew of Comus. And that's the oldest surviving organization behind the Mardi Gras festivities in New Orleans. And the Mystic Crew of Comus is basically an ancient Greek god of sort of comedy, of mischief. And that is basically the underlying theme that ties occultism from Babylon to Shakespeare to the Mardi Gras to Discordianism. And the underlying ritual behind it is what's called the sacred killing of the king. So I find it curious that New Orleans is the home of the Mystic Crew of Comus, who have historically been connected with the sacred killing of the king, and that it was also basically the hornet's nest, the cabal of conspirators that were involved in the assassination of JFK. And also connected to that assassination, investigated as a conspirator, was by Jim Garrison, was Carrie Thornley, who was the founder of Discordianism, which continues this theme of what's referred to as the wise fool, or the trickster archetype. And carry that forward to the previous president. The whole theme of Discordianism really is what drove the sort of mischievous pranksterism behind the whole meme culture, or right-wing affiliated plus Discordian meme culture that helped to propel Donald Trump's election to the White House. And of course, Donald Trump's been referred to as the chaos president. That's no accident. And he ultimately is kind of this idea of the fool, the jester, who has been consciously put in power. So I'll show you where some of this information is. So most of it is distributed for my book. What I've done is I've recreated this article section in my website, which I've brought over most of the popular articles from my previous sites. So the recent article I put together is The Wise Fool from Babylon to Discordianism. And so here we can trace now what I'm talking about. So the several chapters that are referred to is from Babylon, Baphomet, Elizabethan Age, because that covers Shakespeare, counterculture, and finally Ordo ab Discordia, which is my chapter on Discordianism. Do you have any questions before I keep moving?
No, this is a great setup. I think maybe if we could go back just a second before we go here, meaning where do you believe this originated, as far as you mentioned back to Babylon as well. And then we also, my research as well takes it back to a place called Judah, possibly, where we get the Judean religion. Right. And if we look at, where Christianity and Islam spawn from, the Abrahamic religions, it all pretty much spawns from this place, right? And these people.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I'm not sure what your interpretation of that is, but basically, there's it depends on if you take a religious approach or is, purely sort of
True.
empirical, historical approach. So basically,
Yeah, and but before I want to just clarify there. So when you listen to what David's saying, he's basically telling us that we've been managed via chaos magic, magic in different ways. And through this time, it's been literally 2,400 years or so, or 2,600 years that civilization has been managed this way, and it's to keep us away from the truth and knowledge. So a lot of the stuff out there that you might read, you're going to have 2, 3, 4, 5 different versions sometimes, and you got to make sense out of it, and it takes a lot of research. So that's why you had mentioned what version do you want, right?
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, basically, it goes back to the beginning of time, right? It's a battle between good and evil, and good. There's a lot of people who claim to be proponents of good, and of course, Orthodox religion is supposed to be, the true representative of it, but they tend to be corrupted. So,
is that the nature, David? Do you feel of just the world that was created as a result of this magic, where we have people in positions that shouldn't be there? I know you've talked about it in other podcasts and with myself, and whether it's in religion, the alleged religious scholars or the priest, it's this system that has been built on this magic where it's been turned upside down, our world, right?
Yeah. So basically, good it's been the concept of good has been so fully hijacked that people are following religions without realizing to what extent they're following dogma. That's been overly complicated and usually deliberately. So good is very simple. Good is logical, because we all share this planet. So obviously, we should treat. We live in this planet. We've got certain basic needs. Shelter, food, and companionship. So every other human being obviously has the same needs. So we should respect the fact. That's why it's founded on the golden rule that you should treat others as you would they onto you. It's just pure logic, right? But the problem is that it requires a hope in something larger than ourselves. It requires a belief in good, and that good is not just a principle, but it's a living principle, which has many different names by different cultures, but that's what God is. So basically, it's the belief that order is the underlying nature of the universe, and order is good, and good is to basically to be compassionate, to live positively, to respect your fellow human beings, and so on and so forth. So the problem is that for those who suspect that the universe is created by accident, that there is no God ultimately, then there's no ultimate consequence for their actions. So, I'm simplifying this, but basically you can go back through all the philosophers, especially, like modern existentialists, and that's ultimately what their argument is. And occultism is at the root of it. It's basically, if there is no God, then our actions have no consequence, and we can do whatever we want. So not only can we do whatever we want, but we should actively pursue the advancement of our own desires. And that's effectively the battle of good and evil. So that's why it's a normal human tendency to choose one or the other, for the two options to be apparent. They call it the right and left hand path. And so that's why it's as old as man. So it existed before the devil. The devil didn't create evil; he chose evil. So that's why this battle that we see throughout time is actually basically this sort of metaphysical debate, or struggle, which is not in human beings, but it's a consequence of our human existence. So So in the very ancient times, you had the prophets who came to remind humanity of the golden rule, and yet others who resisted it, who were prone to temptation and chose to deny their responsibility to others, and instead to rationalize their rejection of good principles, and to sort of fabricate this religion of evil. So
I mean, when we say this religion of evil, I would say most people today are living that and have chosen that, and they feel they're doing good when actually they're participating in this evil, in the destruction of themselves, their children, their ancestors, grandchildren, all the traditions and so forth. I see none of them pay respect to that, very few people. And that's the culture that you and I live in today.
Yeah, there's no doubt. So, and it's always been like that. Not always will be, but the thing is, it's humans have free will. So
sure.
It just depends on everyone. Everyone can make their own choice. So it just depends on what period of time you're living in, and what proportion of humanity has chosen the right hand path and what have chosen the left hand path. And the thing is that as time progresses, that group on the left side expands over time. There's always hope that they can be corrected and brought back. That's the part that people miss. So, not to say that we can expect it to happen, but that's ultimately what we have to work for.
Sure.
So out of this basically core concept, you have this rationalization for the worship of evil, and what it manifested as is the worship of what's called the dying God, referred to as the dying God, the dying and resurrecting God. And this is an archetype that was identified and in recent times by James Fraser, who wrote The Golden Bough. And so this is where now we get to the origin of it back in Babylon. So because this Dying God archetype has also been discovered by modern day occultists, and they associate it, particularly starting with Carl Jung, with what they call the trickster archetype. So Carl Jung thought he identified this archetype, in various cultures, but behind it, what he was really referring to was the dying God, which is basically variations of Satan. And so what it was traced to is basically dying God is one of a trinity. He's the son of God, but his mother is also his sister, and the sister is Venus. So they had typically been identified as one and the same God. And Venus, the Latin name for Venus is Lucifer, because it's the first star visible in the morning and closely associated with the sun. So it was worshipped as one god, as a dual sort of androgynous god. And so it was because it was associated with the sun, it was associated with the cycle of the seasons and the four seasons, and with the two solstices and two equinoxes. So that's why all these festivals are tied with those. So the four basic satanic festivals are Christmas, not the Christian Christmas, but the winter solstice, which is timed with Christmas deliberately. Easter, which is the resurrection of the god. St. John's Day, which is midsummer, and Halloween. So when you go back to the origins of Christmas, it can be traced back to what's called the Zagmuk, or the Akitu festival of Babylon, which is the origin of the Saturnalia. And that's based on the worship of Bel, or Marduk, the ancient god of the Babylonians. And it's basically a 12-day festival, which highlights the struggle of the god against the dragon, which in Mesopotamian mythology is known as Tiamat. And of course, Bel is associated with the Anunnaki. So the Anunnaki is basically, scholars recognize that there's a clear link between Anunnaki and Anakim of the Bible, because the giants are a repeated theme almost throughout most Middle Eastern mythologies, because the dying god typically is a usurper god. He's a god who, there is a creator god who creates the universe, and then the dying god actually defeats him in a war with the giants or Anunnaki. So I regard this as being sort of, the early justification for devil worship, or the dying god, which was actually Lucifer, is worshipped as now the god to replace the creator god because he succeeded in vanquishing him. And so this god, in addition to being identified with Venus, he's typically identified with Saturn. And this is where we get another topic, which I'll just refer to quickly because I won't have time to get into it. But Saturn is Moloch in the Bible, associated with Baal, and his mythology involves him eating his own children, and that became the justification for the early human and specifically child sacrifice in ancient times. And that's why the Bible refers to the early Israelites sacrificing or passing their children through the fire of Moloch. The Canaanites used to construct a statue of Moloch with mechanical hands, and they would place the baby. They put a fire in the interior of the statue, and they would have mechanical arms that would lift the child into its mouth and into the furnace to burn it. And that's basically the core of these ancient, satanic rituals that would involve human sacrifice. It's often believed that there was some kind of intoxicant that was ingested, so either like mead or wine or other intoxicants have been proposed. The Magi were known to have used the halma, which is related to the soma, which of course is referred to by Aldous Huxley. And usually would concluded with orgies. So in fact, the Zagmuk festival concludes with what's called a Heroes Gamos, which is the ritual copulation of the king and the queen, which is supposed to be an earthly representation of the copulation of the god and goddess. And that's basically the true origin of the sex magic. I mean, this is not just my theory. You can look at Dan Brown for, to see how common that association is. And that was supposed to be concluded with the killing of the king. So James Fraser, his theory is that what happens is that the king, because the king represented the fertility, the king was the earthly embodiment of the dying god. And so his vitality was, the fertility of the land was dependent on his vitality. So as he aged, it would come time to kill him. So of course, the king didn't want to die. He had enough power. So what happened is that a replacement was proposed in his place, and that's what the Saturnalia, which basically is a later modification of the 12 Days Festival of Zagmuk, which was celebrated by the Romans, involved a period of festivities where all the laws were reversed. So for 12 days, the servants and masters switched places, and they could order around, and they usually used to make like joke commands and stuff like that. And then at the end, the Feast of Fools, who was the replacement for the king, would have to be slaughtered in the king's place.
Interesting.
So, yeah. So I go in here. There's a very interesting tie here with the Khazars, which is interesting, but because the Khazars were basically ancestors of descendants of the Scythians. There's a whole other story we don't need to get into, but I just want to mention.
Thousands of years of history, right?
Exactly.
They're all podcasts and books in themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now we come to the Templars, and so the Templars, they're sort of the patron saint of the Templars was Saint George. And Saint George is basically another adaptation of the dying god. It's a repeat of the struggle, because Saint George slaying the dragon is just a modern variation on the ancient mythologies of the Zagmuk and the of the Babylonians of Bel or Marduk conquering the dragon Tiamat.
And that's
so
the patron saint of much of Europe, right, and Russia and so forth.
Exactly. And so this is why the Order of St. George, I cover this in another chapter. Again, I won't get into, because a lot of my research recently has exposed a pretty fascinating, extensive connection between the founding of the Order of St. George and all the other Neo-Templar orders, like especially the Spanish orders, like the Order of Santiago, Montesa, Calatrava, and all those orders, and the Order of the Dragon. And of course, back to the Order of the Garter, which is founded again on the myth of St. George. So St. George is actually sort of another replacement for a god who's worshipped simultaneously by the Jews and the Sufis. By the Jews, he's worshipped as Elijah, and Elijah is the key communicator of the revelation. So all the Kabbalists through history who have received some kind of Kabbalistic revelation have usually received it through Elijah. And then the Sufis, he's worshipped as a figure called the Khidr, which means the green one. And this is a personage mentioned in the Quran. He's not referred to as green, but the Sufis have basically taken their demonic apparitions and have identified it with this figure from the Quran. And so the green one basically is a popular motif, right? It's well known, commonly associated with witchcraft and Wicca and all those traditions.
Why do you believe the color green is the picture? And then of course there's always the phallic, and he's always like the trickster and in nature. Yeah. Do you have any research there, or any comments on that?
I would guess it's all because it's all founded on fertility. So green refers to. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
So what's interesting is that one of the most important magicians of medieval times is Henry Cornelius Agrippa, and there's very few mentions of descriptions of the Baphomet worship by the Templars, but he makes one of the earliest associations, and he associates it with Priapus, which is who's supposedly the ugly son of Dionysus and Aphrodite. And Priapus is pretty famous in the history of mythology because, of course, he's associated with a gigantic phallus. So it's to say that the Dying God, in fact, the Dying God has always been associated with the phallus. It goes back to the worship of Osiris, and particularly the obelisks that were built in Egypt that were basically phallic symbols associated with the phallus, because of course the phallus is associated with fertility.
So throughout history, the kings or the royalty, as far as we know, in this age, going back to this Babylonian magic through Judah and through the various religions today, mm-hmm. they would be representatives of, do you feel they were sons of these spirits, and that's how they came about? For example, i.e. Solomon and King David, and when you hear about the stories of Jesus, there's some weird magic going on there in regards to fertility, and possibly these people were impregnated not by a human, but possibly the spirit world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think so. Yeah. But it's only a theory.
Sure.
Right. So that's where the facts lead to. They lead to that conclusion. But it sounds fantastic, and that's why I don't jump to say yes, it is. But
sure,
I'm still that's
probably the simple way of. Gotcha.
I mean, the thing is, I'm still trying to make sense. Everything I've been able to accumulate is circumstantial evidence. Mm-hmm. It's extensive. Like, case is super, super strong, but I still don't have the smoking gun, right? I still don't have the confession, and we're not going to get it. So, we're just stuck with having to assume. So, yeah, that does seem to be the case, because when you look at especially right up until modern times, you look at the history of the Kabbalah, and it's based on the belief that the the sons of God, or the Anunnaki, the Anakim, were offspring of the sons of God and human beings, and so that this superior race, they're called in the Zohar. They're called, in fact, in the Bible, they're called the mixed multitude, and it's the Zohar that associates them with the sons of God, and so this mixed multitude is the Aryan race. So as paradoxical as it might seem, the whole concept of the Aryan race is actually a Kabbalistic myth of Jewish, occult Jewish supremacy. And so it's the belief that they are semi-divine because they are offspring of the fallen angels. So there's what people believe today, and then there's what happened in the past, and that I don't know for real, but I mean, I would assume that this Hieros Gamos, this ritual sacred marriage between the king and the queen, was effectively to produce a son of God, right? So some kind of offspring through, probably the dying God spirit, or Lucifer would possess the king through the ritual. This is what we have in Rosemary's Baby.
Yeah.
Right? So
yeah, and it's interesting. This, I forget. I think it's parthenogenesis is what they call it. Basically, it's when a human or any other animal or an insect has a baby or offspring without having sex with another male or whatever it may be. So
incubus, succubus.
Correct. And so there's a lot of stories going back, and I believe even to King David, if you read through the scripture, he was basically I think the offspring of Asmodeus and someone else, and that was one of the kings of the demons. So it's interesting, and the concept of demons or daemons back then is a little bit different from now. And you hear the Greek philosophers had talked about it. I believe it was Plutarch that the daemons could be reincarnated, and they had the free will to do good or bad when they came into incarnation. So you go back to these different stories, and then the philosophers talking about it, and then you read the scripture, and then also our whole world has been built, I believe, upon this. And then do you have anything as far as information on the Lord God of hosts? So that's been something I've been studying lately, where there's actually two entities ruling. There's the God above high, right, of truth and so forth. But on the world, there's the devil, there's Satan, and that was the offspring, that was the prince of the world, i.e. the king, right?
Yeah.
So
I mean, the thing is that, Satanism doesn't necessarily announce itself in the world as overt worship of the devil. For the most part, it disguises itself as Orthodox religion. So, the Bible has two competing messages in it, and that's pretty apparent. So there's the underlying original monotheistic message, and then there's the Luciferian message, which over time Luciferians try to impart on it, and that's effectively, the Kabbalah is there to derive the hidden codes, but you can see there's so many distortions in the Bible that were clearly input. And this is not just my theory. There's Ernst Werthewing, he's like the leading expert in New Testament, the Old Testament, study of the Old Testament. He points out that you can prove that the Bible was altered.
Of course. No, they had in the Catholic Church, if you go back, they had doctors of the church. And if you research the doctors of the church, they were tasked with rewriting the Bible. So a lot of them were basically, they wrote the St. John, for example. One who I believe was one of my ancestors, St. Bede, who was a doctor of the church and the father of English history, who happened to write that, I believe, in the 7th or 8th century. And he was taxed with translating it into English.
Right.
So, and then when you, just to correlate with what you're saying there, because I do a lot of scriptural study on my side and try to make sense out of the scripture, literally one word, you have to study the etymology going back to the Greek, to the Hebrew. And even when you study it, as far as when you're looking online or whatever, it's always BS. You got to go back actually and look at old books and then cross-reference it. And sometimes it'll be right on the reference, but I'd say 7 times out of 10, when you go look and you try to find the meanings that are given to us, and even the books that have been given us to cross-reference, they're all been doctored.
Yeah.
Or just that lie has been carried, that magic through time, where people are just regurgitating it as well, right?
Right.
So, okay.
And then you go back to the purpose of Jesus's mission, right? It's very clear. It's very simple. He was reprimanding the rabbis of his time, who had basically so convoluted this religion of theirs that they created this very complex dogma, which is all, full of all kinds of rituals and rites and ceremonies and specifics of practice. When Jesus was trying to say, he tried to remind them that the purpose was the golden rule.
It's that simple.
It's that simple. It's not to eliminate all the rules that come with it, but it's just that's the core spirit of it. And so
and through all these rituals and through all this obfuscation over the years, people forget that.
Right. And that ritual provides the pretense of authority without preaching the true message. It's the vehicle that allows them to maintain status and authority without actually preaching the true religion. But that's the orthodox side. Then you have the esoteric side, right? So the esoteric side is another one. So Gnosticism specifically, and other variations of Kabbalah and Sufism, they tend to reverse the message completely. So it's actually taking that deviation and taking it to really quite further to the extreme.
Yeah, and what's interesting, if you again, I know you're saying Orthodox, and what the Orthodox would say, they would blame that on the Roman Catholics, actually. So what's your thoughts there as far as the Roman Catholicism, and then you have the Greek Orthodox and the Russian Orthodox, which they believe is the true Christianity. And again, here and there, the Bible, the scripture has been doctored, whatever is going on. What are your thoughts there as far as your research into that?
Well, I try to avoid this discussion because it often ends up being a debate of whose religion is better, but I'll just give you my perspective. It's just that the Quran is the only way it's the only clue. It's the only way to make sense of it. Because the Quran basically elucidates 2 points. And the one point is that the Old Testament was altered. And the second point is that the Christians adopted pagan beliefs. And that helps to clarify everything. Because once you understand that Jesus was actually just a prophet and that he was trying to preach the original message, and then when you know that the Bible was corrupted, then you know that the original message was gone. And what is the original message? Yeah, I believe you have to go to the Quran to identify it. So one of the important clues from the Quran is that the devil, is not some separate divinity, but it actually explains what these demons, so-called demons, are. So in Islam, they're referred to as jinn, or it's been popularized in Western culture as genies. And they are basically entities that are living entities with free will that are composed of some kind of nature which is different from matter. So most creatures that we know and can see, like humans and animals and plants and so on, are made of matter, and jinn are made of some other substance. The Quran describes them as smokeless fire, and I believe what it might mean is energy. So that's basically the core. So what's happening? These spirits have been identified. Any culture throughout history has always had some kind of version of spirits. They're spirits, demons, fairies, ghouls, ghosts, goblins, leprechauns, elves, right? But it's typically always the same thing. So, the occultism has always been based on contact with these beings, and this is why you go back to the ancient worship of the dying god. The dying god was believed to reside in the underworld, where he governed the spirits of the dead. But what that meant was not this, because these entities, jinn, were believed to be the spirits of the departed. And this comes all the way, that belief comes all the way forward to seances, where people think that they can contact their lost relatives or famous people from the past, when really it's typically, entities that are impersonating these people. But
And on the Christian side, these would be the, i.e., sons of God, the descendants of these, i.e., spirits and humans, right?
Yeah, and
Okay,
more than that,
sure.
it's basically the fundamental Kabbalistic belief is that the sons of God created a race of beings a race of superior humans who have been preserving the ancient wisdom ever since.
Interesting. And the Freemasons, when you look at what they write about, and it seems as they're trying to get back this knowledge as well, that through time, throughout all this chaos magic, that they're reconstructing a lot of it. And we're given this free will, you and I, to research this stuff. I live in a country that was started, I believe, by Freemasons as well.
Oh, yeah.
Then at the same time, they're closing down on knowledge and cancel culture and all these different things, and people
Yeah.
are getting it seems as if time is speeding up for this revelation, for this end times. Do you believe that as well?
Oh yeah, there's no doubt about it. That's the plan. They're
Yeah,
actively working to fulfill the prophecies of the book of Revelation.
and it's weird. I started talking to you, I believe, about 7 years ago, and I believe we talked about this stuff as well, but not feeling as if it was the end times. And now we are talking 7 years later, and we're like, we're a lot closer, like zoom, like on steroids, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah. So basically, if you look back this Al-Qaeda, the St. George character, and Priapus, which are all related, the Green Man. It then becomes the basis of the Feast of Fools. So the Feast of Fools is the survival of the ancient Saturnalia in Europe. And there's two festivals, basically the Feast of Fools and the Mardi Gras Carnival. And so this is where you get the origin of our Christmas festivals, which coincide with the 12 days of Christmas.
Sure, St. Nicholas and Santa Claus.
Rule, right?
Yeah.
And you get things like the maypole, which is another, again, a phallic symbol. Here I have a reference you can see from Disney's version, their song Topsy Turvy is basically a reference to the Feast of Fools, because the Quasimodo at the beginning of the book is chosen as the Feast of Fools for the Mardi Gras. And so Topsy Turvy is a reference to turning everything upside down.
You know what? I just have a current event, and I wanted to share that with you. I was thinking about our world, and one of the podcasts I listen to that, not all the time, but is one of the most popular in the world, is one of the kings of comedy right now, Joe Rogan. One of the highest paid podcasters. I mean, literally 150 million, 15 million, and that's just one of the deals he's made. He's got several businesses. He's like a king when it comes to this thing, right? Topsy-turvy, right?
Right.
And it's just complete, it's a godless type of podcast. It's basically very liberal, right? So in any event, I just wanted, what do you think of that analogy?
He's a modern Pied Piper of MK Ultra. He's the modern version.
There you go.
But if you look at the words here, this is the lyrics from the Disney's song, which it says, "It's the day the devil in us gets released." This is a kids movie for kids.
Mm-hmm.
It's the day we mock the prey and shock the priest.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is topsy-turvy at the Feast of Fools. All right, so basically this Feast of Fools now survives. So basically Priapus becomes Puck and the god of the witches.
It literally reminds me of American culture right now.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
So, and then Puck, or Robin Goodfellow, is the version of Puck. And there's I don't have a picture of it, but you can see that there's etchings that show that represent Puck as the god of the witches with a giant phallus, basically, overtly identifying him with Priapus. And so Robin Goodfellow, of course, becomes Robin Hood, which is why Robin Hood is kind of like dressed in green, because he's the green man, he's the buck character. And
It's interesting that a lot of people play this today and they don't even realize they are.
Well, this is why these things survive. This is why you look at we celebrate, North American or Europeans celebrate Christmas every year. So Christmas is a dual celebration. What does Satan? I said that by the Freudian slip, as they would say.
Sure.
Santa has nothing to do with Christmas.
Of course, yeah. And what do I have to do as a father here in North America, in the United States? I have to work harder and get all these presents and keep up with the Joneses. And of course, it's this thing where we celebrate, and it's always about being together and being with your family and celebrating that and being grateful. And then, of course, I have to buy these presents. And as I do it and I have more kids, it gets expensive and it gets me stressed out.
Absolutely. So, I mean, you're serving the machine.
Correct.
So basically, the Christmas is the modern survival of the Saturnalia, and Santa is Saturn, is it's Chronos. So Chronos is the Greek version of Saturn, and Chronos means time, because the Chronos Saturn has always been associated with time, old man time, which is why you find that Santa is an old guy, and this is not by accident. It's because Christmas is actually an occult festival, and has struggled to liberate itself from, it sort of originally disguised itself as Christian so that it could survive, but is struggling to free itself from its disguise. And it's been maintained through the centuries by occultists. And one of the most important contributors to it, two of them, would be Francis Bacon and Shakespeare, if the two weren't, of course, the same person. So this is where it really gets fascinating, is where, Francis Bacon was really kind of, one of the most important people in modern times, godfather of Rosicrucianism, then by extension of Freemasonry. And as I said, many believe that he was originally Shakespeare. So he was a member of what's called the Order of the Helmet. And you can see here,
was he also possibly, do you believe, the Queen's illegitimate son, or legitimate, and they?
Yeah. Okay. I do.
Okay.
I think.
Okay.
I think that Francis Bacon was hugely important.
Sure.
The whole scientific paradigm that we live in was initiated by Francis Bacon. Right. The Royal Society, which gave birth to Freemasonry, was founded towards the advancement of knowledge that Francis Bacon initiated. In fact, there's a whole Rosicrucian stream that I'll just mention that readers can look up, is that he was associated with Elias Artista, who was a sort of an alchemist messiah that was expected. And so Francis Bacon was continually associated with that person. And I go through that in other chapters. But you can see here how, going all the way back to ancient times, how the helmet in this case had clearly phallic associations, and
almost like the spirit as well, like a separate, like the daemon of the person.
Yeah. So basically, you have the dual association here, which is the androgynous deity, right? You have the female god with the phallus of the dying god, and that's ultimately the core meaning of this association of the Order of the Helmet. So Bacon, he basically, what was happening is that at what's called the Inns of Court, which were established on the site of the Templars' headquarters in London, they used to celebrate on Christmas. They used to have these plays that they would play that they would act out, which was based on the Lord of Misrule, which was borrowed from the Saturnalia again and again, the worship of Priapus, or that we just discussed. So, basically a continuation of the Templar phallus worship is brought forward here through Francis Bacon and
part of the chaos magic would be the change of the names through history, right? And the occultist changing it, or whoever was tasked with it.
Yeah, it's basically the 1,000 names of Lucifer.
Sure.
So basically, this is all founded on the worship of Comus or Momus, and this is where you get things like the word for mummery. It's all based on this sort of prankster kind of archetype, this play on this mischievous god, and this is really the origin of Midsummer Night's comedy, Shakespeare's play, because Puck is directly derived from the Green Man that we discussed, the Priapus that we talked about. And so it's really through Bacon and Shakespeare that you now have this survival, this retention of this occult version of Christmas, this variation of the Saturnalia. And it comes to the United States through the person of Thomas Morton. And so Thomas Morton, he founds a community, an early community, because another thing I cover in my book is the Rosicrucian founding of America. So you look at most of the early founders, starting with the Mayflower, were Rosicrucians that were fleeing what they call persecution in
Europe
Holland,
or in Holland,
as well as England.
Gotcha.
And they come to the United States and they found the early communities. And so one of them was by Thomas Morton. It's called Marymount. And the reason why it's called Marymount is in this case, Mount refers to, what did I have it specifically? It's basically it's a crypto reference to sex. And so what happens, what they institute is the worship of the maypole, which is basically also comes from the Saturnalia or the Feast of Fools. And so basically Thomas Morton was also a member of what's called the School of Night. The School of Night is the modern name. They originally refers to as the School of Atheism. And that's a school that Christopher Marlowe belonged to. He was the author of Dr. Faustus, which is, of course, a man who sells his soul to the devil.
And then he starts the School of Atheism.
Right.
Gotcha. Interesting. And that's, just so you know, that's it's been a thorn in my side lately, the atheist, because I never really studied it. I'm familiar because I believe that, I grew up Roman Catholic, i.e. Christian, in a different sense than other people, but I eventually became atheist and I didn't believe in God because of our culture and the people around me that said they were, believed in the Bible. So I became disenchanted with religion and so forth until I got older and I learned about history and different things. But in any event, make a long story short, I decided to do a recent study of atheism and just what I've seen of the people and how they literally their careers are based upon attacking God and religion all day long.
You look at Richard Dawkins.
Yeah. It's it's so disrespectful and pathetic, and a lot of them are academians.
Yeah.
So it's just like I don't know, it scares me, that these people are in such positions of power,
I agree, because it borders on pathological.
Totally pathological, psychotic.
Because, if you were to psychoanalyze the anger of an atheist, you have to wonder, what's the pathology behind it? I wish somebody would explore it and identify it as a condition.
And it's a marketing thing now. And then they have literally, it's like a cult, I believe. A dangerous one at that. So
I also wrote another article because Dawkins was, of course, he was linked in directly with Jeffrey Epstein. He was part of the whole crew. I have another article.
Doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, by John Brockman. And John Brockman basically is a friend of Jeffrey Epstein. He was also a friend of Stuart Brand. And he's very much part of the whole early history of the personal computer and its development towards transhumanism, which is why Jeffrey Epstein was very closely involved in funding transhumanist projects.
Mm-hmm.
And Discordianism, of course, is an important influence behind transhumanism. So if we
these guys they use science and wordplay. They're really, when you analyze what they're saying, they could never stand up against a true philosopher or a true, scholar of religion to a debate. In my opinion.
No.
Yeah,
they would never admit to it though. They'd always pretend that they won.
Of course, yeah, and they're promoted as such, right?
That's it.
Yeah,
but that's part of the plan, right?
Sure.
That's part of the progress that we're experiencing. It's actually a reversal, right? That's
correct. It's the evolution.
That's the chaos that must precede the end times.
So if I'm, correct me if I'm wrong, I know we're going with your study, but to give some hope to the people out there that might agree with some of what we're saying, is that towards the end time, it is switched around on those people that believe they're aristocrats and ruling over us and abusing the people and doing things. They actually kind of get ensnared in the last trap that we're in right now. That's kind of what I'm reading.
I mean, it's going to be the whole reversal, right? So it's taking humanity from the worship of a completely distinct entity beyond, indescribable, infinite entity beyond this universe, to the worship of man. And that's it's the man who is going to be the first to recognize that he is God, or declare himself God. And of course, if you connect it to transhumanism, they want to link that to an AI in some way or another. So from the Feast of Fools and Shakespeare's Lord of Misrule, we come to the mystic crew of Comus. So Comus is the god that we refer to. It's a variation of Priapus, the phallic god. And so the mystic crew of Comus, as I mentioned, is the oldest continuous organization behind the Mardi Gras festivities in New Orleans.
They're still in operation?
Yes. Okay. There's an amazing article written by Mimi L. Eustace. And it's not a scholarly article. It's a blog that was published back in 2005. But if you look behind her story and follow the facts, it lines up. So she claimed that I think it was her grandfather or father, had finally on his deathbed chose to confess to her what he knew about the history of the people behind it, Mr. Crew Comus, who he said were basically behind these sacred killings. At the time, one of the most important ones was the killing of Abraham Lincoln. So this is a chapter that I cover on the American Civil War. There's a lot of detail behind here that we can't discuss, but it's linked to the Carbonari out of Italy. This guy in particular, Rothschild agent, his name was Judah P. Benjamin, who with Albert Pike was a sponsor of the founding of the Ku Klux Klan. And basically, Ku Klux Klan emerged out of the Knights of the Golden Circle, and it's these groups that were behind the American Civil War, orchestrated by the Carbonari out of London.
It's interesting. I thought the Carbonari was out of Italy and Rome, or there's two different factions.
Yeah,
gotcha.
They were.
Well, London's where we get our laws, right? The London Bar and so forth.
Yeah. I remember that Mazzini was working closely with Lord Palmerston.
Sure. And that's a head Masonic headquarters as well.
Yeah. So they were meeting regularly in London. Giuseppe Mazzini, Giuseppe Garibaldi, and a whole host of other, particularly, it's all connected to an organization called Western Destiny in the United States, which is basically a Carbonari front, and they were the ones who pretty much fomented the Civil War in league with Skull and Bones. So what's important here is that the Ku Klux Klan, one of the supposed chief judicial officer of the Klan was Albert Pike, who was simultaneously a Grand Master of the Scottish Rite, the Southern jurisdiction based out of Charleston, South Carolina. This is another trajectory I trace. Is really, really fascinating. Is the evolution of Freemasonry starting from the Bevis Marks Synagogue in London, with its sister branches in the United States, three important leading synagogues at the time, the founding United States, the Beth Elohim in Charleston, and there's one in Philadelphia, and another one in the Shireth in New York. I can't remember their names now, But these are three synagogues who are basically very much at the core of behind the American Revolution. And then out of Beth Elohim, so right after the American Revolution is the congregants of Beth Elohim Synagogue in South Carolina, who produce Scottish Rite Freemasonry. And then Albert Pike then becomes the leader of it. And it's based on Scottish Rite Freemasonry because, of course, they supposedly they preserved a sample of the Baphomet that was brought there to Charleston. Albert Pike becomes the leader, and then out of the Beth Elohim Synagogue, then this is where you get the birth of Reform Judaism, which leads into the Zionist movement. That's a whole other tangent that we won't have time to cover. Sure. So again, Albert Pike was a proponent of Aryan theories. He later became a member of the Theosophical Society, which of course was headed by Blavatsky, who was the most recent proponent or elaborator of the Aryan myth. And that's basically where you have the core doctrine, the racist doctrine of the clan, which would have been based on the mythology that the Aryans are survivors of Atlantis, who are originally descendants of the sons of God, Anakim, Anunnaki, who had preserved the ancient wisdom, quote unquote, Kabbalah since that time.
And this went through, of course, through Judah, the tribe of Judah, and through the various prophets and so forth, right?
Well, this is where it gets strange, because this is where you have a simultaneously contradicting history, right? Like, really what happened is that when the lost tribes get scattered, they get scattered to the land of the Medes and all the way into Central Asia, and that's where supposedly they intermarry with the Scythians, and that's where they become the lost tribes, become the Turks. They eventually migrate to Europe, where they become Scandinavians and Scots.
Sure, and then you had the Picts and the Celts and so forth.
It's really more of a separate grouping. It's really specifically the Scandinavian descendants of Odin and the Vikings and the Scots, particularly in Orkney, which is where the Sinclairs come from, and that's where you get this heritage of Scottish Rite Freemasonry.
Yeah, interesting. Because you had the Jutes, I believe. That's where the royal house is now, the Queen and so forth.
Mm-hmm. And because we got to understand that all this occultism is a reverse of the Bible. Right? It's a reverse history where God is bad, the devil is good, and so where the story of because the Zohar refers to the Aryan, they're not called Aryans, they're called the descendants of the sons of God, are referred to as the mixed multitude. And the mixed multitude is a concept that's repeated several times in the Bible as sort of being a corruptive influence on the Jewish people. And really the Aryans, these Aryans or whatever, the descendants of the Anakim become the Canaanites. So throughout history, this is where the history of the Bible is very corrupt, is you find there's continual intermarriage with the Canaanites, despite the fact that it's forbidden.
Sure, and of course we know the Canaanites are very industrious, right? They would bring secularism and business and trading all around the world through their boats and so forth.
Phoenicians, yeah.
Phoenicians, correct.
So, even I think King David's mother was a Canaanite, right? Or was it his wife? Anyway, the point is that, one of the major crimes in the Bible for which they were eventually sent into exile was two things: was the worship of the dying god Baal, and persistent intermarriage with the Canaanites and all the other, affiliated peoples. But then if you read it esoterically, you can see that these Canaanites are actually descendants of the Anakim. So, some portion of the Jews likely fabricated these stories to claim this, some kind of unique descent from gods or, entities. But simultaneously, you have the lost tribes who are, among the Scythians that are considered really the descendants or the Aryans, the source of the Aryan people. So you have the simultaneous history, which is weird. Why basically you've got, it's a Jewish esoteric mythology which produced the Aryan race, while also Yeah, that produced the Aryan race. So you have this dual path of, this like legitimate Jewish descent, simultaneously this competing, opposing Aryan descent, but they seem to feed the
Be
same
like
mythology.
brothers or cousins, right? And then they're both masters of the horse,
Yeah,
and they literally conquered the world on the horse. And if we look at, the Khan, Genghis Khan, and i.e. the Turks, that the descendants and so forth, right?
yeah,
So,
exactly. So the thing is, by when I decide, I have a chapter on the Aryan myth where I show that most of the people who formulated the Aryan myth were associated with Moses Mendelssohn, and Moses Mendelssohn was the leader of. So he's the one who set the spark for the rise of Reform Judaism in the Haskalah, but he was also a successor, a recognized successor of Shabtai Zvi. Like the guy who coined the term Aryan was Friedrich Schlegel, who married the daughter of Moses Mendelssohn. So you have a guy, you have these philosophers who are all in the circles of the leading Luciferian Kabbalists of their time, formulating the myth of the Aryan race, now being adopted by Albert Pike. And this is where, so as I said, the mystic crew of Comus, they're connected with the whole circle of the conspirators in the Civil War. According to Eustace, they are involved in the killing of the King Ritual, which is the killing, in this case, of Abraham Lincoln. And so if we jump ahead to modern times, of course, the whole idea of the wise fool becomes the inspiration behind Discordianism. And Discordianism is what led eventually to the creation of chaos magic about a decade or so later, a couple of decades later. So it's the idea, really what it comes down to, and this is where it ties all together to MK Ultra and everything, is the idea that demonic possession is what psychiatrists called schizophrenia. So they believe that the ancient shamans through their rituals, they were able to induce them having themselves be possessed by the gods, quote unquote gods, and that they were then able to communicate the information from the beyond, because that's what the occultists are looking for. That's why they have seances and rituals, basically to induce the possession of identity so that their information can be communicated.
Yeah, and if we look at this practice, this goes back, correct me if I'm wrong, back to the Delphia, the priestesses of Delphia, and they would sit over the tripod of Apollo, and his rotting carcass and these fumes would go up into her vagina, into her nostrils. And I believe it was Plutarch that described the rituals that they would do, but they would use actually royalty, aristocrats, the daughters, and they would be virgins. And they talk about one of the daughters being raped by Apollo, and then her conceiving a child through this ritual. Right. And then a lot of the times they got mad and they died, meaning they went schizophrenic or crazy. Yeah. Right. And then over time, they stopped using the royal family people from them. They used other women in the culture there.
Yeah.
So,
and that's exactly it. So it's oracles, and that's what the book of Revelation is.
And that's as if through our culture and everything that's happening is that they're inducing this in our world, i.e. mental illness and schizophrenia. And yes. I've been studying, I have a podcast, and of course I want to do more, but I'm busy trying to, pay Caesar, right? Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so I can't do what I want to do. But one of the themes of that podcast is these people that have done horrendous crimes, and usually they're normal Joes, or sometimes they're kids that are on these psychotropic drugs and so forth, and they see demons and they talk to Satan, and then they kill. They kill. Exactly. They're ordered to kill.
Exactly. So the whole point of MK Ultra was to induce schizophrenia.
Gotcha.
Right? Because they believe that, and this is why Aldous Huxley is the kingpin behind it, and this is why Brave New World, the drug that's used to control the population, he calls it Soma, because
and what's crazy there, right, is if you look at modern society And the people that are, i.e. normal, that are working out there, normal jobs or what have you, most of them are on these type of drugs, but
Right.
you know, they scoff it at people that are have drug problems, that they have the drug problem or the alcoholic problem.
Yeah.
And then you see what Trump induced in a lot of these people. It was just madness here in America, and it still is. So I believe these people that I see that are allegedly normal are borderline schizophrenic, if not.
Right. Yeah, it could very well be.
Sure. Okay.
So
It's pretty crazy here, David.
Yeah,
So.
But you know, the way with globalization, it's like, you know, it's
global. It's global. Yeah.
So so MK Ultra was based on this whole idea of the wise fool, or what they call divine madness. Right. So that's what the fool is. I mean, originally, so where Shakespeare sort of helped to popularize the concept of the jester, and it's the jester is the only one who's able to tell the king the truth, right? That's the common sort of motif that's become popular. So this is why
it was as if, and forget me if I'm wrong, and I want to go along with your line you're thinking, as if these Freemasons were bringing about this world of kind of controlled knowledge, because you look at it, like I had said, we have the patent office here, right? And we have all these things over us controlling us, but allowing us to pursue whatever we liberally want to do. Mm-hmm. And through this, they were recreating this knowledge in this body of knowledge, i.e. fools that go back and they blaspheme, say, against the dogmas of religion, right? And they're allowed to.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, so that's right.
What I mean by that, meaning that the current scripture that has been doctored, they get to talk about it, and we could talk about it in a way that's free, where we're not burned at the stake for, claiming the Bible's different from what the priest had said.
Yeah, you get things like South Park and stuff like that, right? Basically,
yeah. There you go. It's gotten that far, right?
It's gone that far.
Sure.
So I mean, the idea is that, so Nietzsche is kind of like the modern archetype of the divine, the divine madness, right? So he went crazy because of syphilis, but it's interpreted that he was actually, it wasn't really mad. He was experiencing divine madness. So
and all these prophets and people, if we look at, and again, sorry to interrupt, but Carl Jung, Helena Blavatsky, Emanuel Swedenborg, all these people, when I researched them, had an illness, a peculiar illness, until they died, usually from a young age.
Right. Yeah, it could be connected.
Sure.
But so in the case of Nietzsche, the idea is that because goes back to the idea of good and evil, and you need to believe in some kind of greater good in order to choose to do good, right? So if you stop to think about it, and you decide to choose to entertain the possibility that there is no God, then it's a moment of panic, right? And that's what that's what Edward Munch's scream is supposed to be, right? It's supposed to be if that sudden panic or realization that, oh my gosh, life has no meaning. And so the idea is that instead of going into despair, you laugh, right? So you kind of crack. And so the idea of divine madness is that you're seeing a greater truth than everybody else is. And in the case of Discordianism, it's the idea that if you believe that there's no truth, then you're trying to provoke everybody to recognize the same, to get them to suspend their belief in whatever they've chosen to believe. You can mock them. And this is why Discordianism is founded on a prankster approach. It's like Anton and Robert Anton Wilson said, I can't remember exactly what he said. It's like it's a joke, but it's a serious joke, or something like that, right? It's got a purpose. We joke around quite a bit, but we've got they're on a mission. They're on a mission to destroy God, right? They're on a mission to completely upend human civilization, to reinvent it. So it's the idea that if you mock everything, so that you can try to force people to recognize that there is no truth and get into this, state of jocularity where nothing matters.
And we're seeing that with modern culture, what some people would call neoliberalism, and where it's just getting to the ridiculous, and our words are being changed, books are being burned, statues are being torn down by people that have no knowledge, that no philosophy, they don't know about history, yet they're the ones in control.
Yes. So, I mean, there you have the fulfillment of the book of Revelation, right? So they're trying to bring about the end times, and this is part of it. This is the creation of chaos. And so Discordianism, that whole idea of disruption, of disrupting everything, is effectively what inspired chaos magic. And chaos magic is basically just a new form, a new approach to magic. It's one that rejects all, if you could call it orthodox magic, right? It rejects all magical tradition and reinvent it. And just you use what works, not necessarily, you don't need to follow, the prescribed rituals as they are in the books, as they've been repeated thousands of times. You can completely reinvent it and use new tools, right? You can use a lamp instead of a candle, and you can use,
Photoshop memes, right?
Exactly. And this is where now you get to more recently the meme war, which helped help Trump win the election. The larger picture is that it was a Mossad mission that operated through Russia, through the Russian mob, and in collaboration with Facebook, which was assisted by Palantir, which is a CIA-backed company founded by Peter Thiel, who was one of Trump's leading advisors. And like, I have a whole chapter on it, on the Great Meme War, in my book as well too, to show the whole link of, especially places on the web like 4chan and their links to Discordianism, and the links of various, sort of not hackers, but some of these meme warriors and their links to Discordianism.
Yeah, and then as well, you have they're revealing the truths as well in mainstream, the ties, and then Biden as well with Russia, almost proving as if they have a say over what goes on here, obviously, right?
It's a Hegelian dialectic, right?
Sure.
It's both are necessary. They manipulate both left and right. And then, so the most recent manifestations of the Feast of Fools, of the Wise Fool, of the Saturnalia, is consciously is Bohemian Grove,
which is Alex Jones made famous, right?
Yeah, and which is consciously adapted from Shakespeare, as well as the Merry Pranksters, right? The Merry Pranksters as well. Merry Pranksters, of course, created by MK Ultra subject Ken Kesey, and he admitted that himself, that he modeled himself on Shakespeare's Lord Chamberlain's men. And of course, if you look at One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, it's the idea that the inmates run the asylum, right? It's the idea that they're not crazy, the doctors are crazy. That it's the anti-psychiatry that developed out this entire sort of shamanistic, neo-shamanistic idea that was promoted at Esalen, that was basically given attention in Kesey's book. Again, the same idea of divine madness.
Like when I go to the doctor and he has this great education, and I have this problem with my son and he's literally dying, and he sees him for 2 minutes and wants to give him a pill, rather than finding out the true origins of what's going on with him and what happened to him in the history. And go to the next doctor, the same thing, the next doctor, the next doctor, the next doctor. And those are our doctors.
Well, in this case, it goes back to MK Ultra and the belief that schizophrenia is divine madness, right? So they think that schizophrenics are not crazy. They're just people who see a higher truth. And ultimately, they see a higher truth because they're connected to the spirit world.
Gotcha.
They're possessed. And that takes us basically to the end of that article.
Sure. And when we look at the Christian religion, I've studied, the idea of Satan. And when you go back over history and research, what the church fathers had said, basically Satan was Simon Magus, who was allegedly a person. Simon Magus became Saint Peter when I researched the words and the wordplay, and they also label him the first Gnostic.
Right.
So it's interesting that they would call him the first Gnostic, and then his followers were the Antichrist or the devils, and they possess this supernatural knowledge. And he's also part of the church, right? I believe he was one of the brothers of the apostles.
Yeah.
And then of course the Pope sits in St. Peter's chair.
Yeah, it's very curious. I mean, it's, of all the religions, Christianity, I hate to offend Christians, believing Christians, but it's one of the most, overtly adapted to pagan belief systems. Maybe this, the whole idea of the Saturnalia is associated with Sol Invictus, and
Yeah,
really,
and it's essentially it goes back to what the Greeks would have called demons and demon worship, and they're now angels. The church changed them to angels, right?
I mean, the Eucharist, right? The eating of the flesh and the drinking of the blood.
Yeah.
It's from human sacrifice. It's from pagan rituals.
But if we look at also that those have been toned down. When I look and I research the history of Christianity, I know you've researched it as well, but they have curbed back those pagan traditions over time. And when I researched, say, the father of the church and these other apostles and St. Augustine, it was as if they were trying to eventually get rid of it. And it was like worldwide.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, meaning
it's as if the traditions were there. And when they would talk about it, it was as if we could celebrate these rites without sacrificing people and killing people in blood.
Yeah.
That was not necessary. That's kind of the message that I had got. And then when we look at our world today, of course, there's things going on the occult, esoteric, not all occultism, not all Gnosticism. There's just people that walk the left hand and the right hand path, if you understand that. The left hand path essentially is the people that follow, they put their flesh, above and their self above God. They operate that way. It's not that they don't believe in God. Some of them might not. Some of them say they don't believe in Satan either. But they're basically operating in that way. They put their flesh, which essentially is when I research, it would be my second brain, rather than me using philosophy and truth and morals and standing up as Vitruvian man. I'm literally using my second brain, my appetites, my emotions, my sexual desires to rule this. Right?
Yeah. Exactly. Well, I mean, in Islam, the Quran basically teaches that that Christians, despite the fact that they might have, adapted their beliefs to pagan beliefs, even invented the idea of Jesus being the Son of God, they're still to be respected as a people of the book. And it basically says that God loves believing Christians, even though it just shows God's mercy, right? And ultimately, it's a lesson that we're not here to judge anybody, right? It's not about whose religion is better or who's right. In the end, only God knows who of us is righteous. While we're living on this earth, we have to agree to disagree.
I agree. And if we look, I believe that the message here was that, we're in the year 2021 and under this Babylonian magic for so long, and we live through these epochs and through these ages. And, from what I gather and from what you witness as well, is that we're at the end of this time of this age and things are speeding up. So possibly, we will see a different world. I don't know. In our lifetimes, we'll probably see the destruction of this world. Rather, it'll be our children or their children in a future time, because I believe if this world ends that we have now, the people that believe in their flesh and put the flesh above God are going to have a tough time going forward. Even though we still live in this world where we have to operate through mammon or through this Satanism that's kind of controlling us, we could still, honor the true God as we're basically in chains under this cult-like culture that we're in.
Yeah. World order.
Yep. So do you see, like, as far as this magic someday ending and we live under truth, and that actually just flips people, like that's the end times, like, whoa, my God, it's this isn't Disneyland, this isn't, you know, Santa Claus, you know, the emperor has no clothes, and now everybody starts to realize we've been living this satanic lifestyle.
Yeah.
And how do people learn? And when I look at myself growing up here, and sometimes I call it the satanic states of America, I had to learn through my pain and through going to jail and prison and not even understanding philosophy and having alcoholic parents, and then eventually learning about a higher wisdom and a better way of life and choosing good over bad, and having to operate in this world on the checkerboard, right? The black and the white.
Yeah.
And it makes it difficult, but I also see that times could change and that we might see a different world. But I see everybody I deal with is literally, they're asleep, David, in my opinion, and they think they're good, but they do not treat people how they want to be treated. The golden rule. I see it every day in my business and everywhere around me.
Yeah.
So those people are going to have a rude awakening, possibly, if this world gets changed. And when we see this now, and we look at current events, and then we research history, there always is an authoritarian regime that arises out of this, and just like, no, this has to stop. And then here comes the Hitlers and the Lenins and the Stalins.
And the pharaohs.
The pharaohs, the pharaohs, right? There you go. Yep. So
yeah, well, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Is there anything? I don't know what time do you got there, David?
I have 6:38.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Do you want to wrap it up with anything?
Sure. Maybe this last observation, just to answer your question.
Sure.
There's a lot of pessimism. You know, my generation especially was pretty bad. A lot of us were raised on Animal Farm, where we believe that it's useless to work for change because it's just going to bring the same criminals in different guys. I think, people in general, I find, have no hope in humanity, no hope in leadership. They don't believe that it's possible to have righteous leadership. One line I like from the Bible, it says something like, when the corrupt rule, the people groan, but when the righteous rule, the people rejoice. It is possible. It is possible to have a righteous world, and things might get a lot worse before they get better. I have no idea where it's going to go, but that's irrelevant. We always have to operate on the assumption that things can change, and it's really important to believe that it is possible, because people are not born bad. They are able to choose between right and wrong, the right and the left-hand path. So,
and correct me if I'm wrong, if we look at religion, there's a lot of people that criticize it, and there's Gnostics that kind of make fun of it. They come from different religions, and of course atheists, they're all reformed, Christians or Islam or whatever it might be. Yeah. But when I look at the core teachings and the methods behind it, it's the core of goodness and values and philosophies. And if you really study them and you understand them and you apply the golden rule, even though you're not Jesus per se or the perfect person, that you can make your life better through these teachings. And that's the whole concept. They're based on ideas, and we center ourselves around these ideas and this knowledge, this core group. And it's through these scholars and through this knowledge that has been handed down to us that we're supposed to live by these ideas and incorporate them into our lives. And if we all truly did that, we would change the world in a day. But that's not the case.
Well, I think everybody knows the truth in their hearts, and they've been induced to denying it with the lie.
And it seems like pain, though, is the only way that people wake up, including myself, David. I know you lived a little bit different than me, but here I feel when I see people, it always takes something to happen, whether it's an illness or
some kind of catastrophes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully not.
Yeah, and I believe it's because of the discordian, the magic, the chaos magic, the spell that everybody is under.
Yeah.
So
And all we can do is try to expose the lie and hope that some will wake up. So
yeah, and I think you're like me after, I'm going on 12 years. I know you're going on 30 years of writing, whatever. And it's like, we're still here. I'm still alive. I've had my door broken down. I've been canceled. I've been shadow banned, but I'm still here. So we keep going, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I know the last time I heard from you before this time was, I'm getting off Facebook. I'm not doing nothing no more. I'm done. And then a year later, you came back and I was like, good, David's back. So, and I messaged you. I'm like, hey, David, you're going to come back on the show. So thank you for your time again, David. It's nice to talk to you. I always learn a lot from you, and I could probably talk to you for 3 hours, but you got a family. I got a family. I haven't ate lunch, and I think you probably have to have dinner, right?
First coming. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's revisit this maybe in another 3 to 6 months, and hopefully we'll be still around. All right.
Sounds good. Always a pleasure, Mo. Thank you.
Definitely. Same here. Take care, man.
Yeah.
All right. Bye.